Danielle Carter woke up early that morning with a calm determination. She had a busy day ahead, full of court hearings and meetings, but first she had to take care of something small, a speeding ticket she had gotten a few weeks ago. It was a minor offense, speeding just a little over the limit on a quiet road. Still, it required her presence in a local court in a small town in Georgia. She wasn't worried. She had faced much bigger challenges in her life. As a senior assistant United States attorney, she was used to pressure and tough situations. This was just a formality. She dressed neatly but simply that morning. No flashy clothes, just a modest blouse and trousers. She wanted to blend in, not to make a scene. She packed her briefcase with the papers she thought she might need and headed out. The drive to the courthouse was uneventful, and she arrived early enough to find a seat in the courtroom before the session began. The courtroom was small, older, and smelled faintly of old wood and dusty books. The benches creaked under the weight of the people who came for their cases that day. Danielle sat quietly, watching the judge preside over other minor cases with a stern look. Judge Walter Jennings was a man in his late 60s, with white hair and a cold, no-nonsense expression. He was known in the town for his strict attitude and quick judgments. When Danielle's name was finally called, she stood and walked toward the judge's bench. She kept her posture straight and calm, showing the confidence that years of law experience had given her. However, she could sense a certain tension in the air, a subtle difference in how the judge looked at her compared to the others. It wasn't obvious at first, but as she approached, she noticed his eyes narrowing slightly, as if judging her not just for the ticket, but for something else. "Ms. Carter," the judge said sharply, "you were caught speeding 5 miles over the limit on Highway 12. "How do you plead?" Danielle answered clearly. "Not guilty, Your Honor. I believe the citation was mistaken." The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly not used to defendants questioning the ticket in this court. "And why would that be?" Danielle explained politely. "I was not speeding in a residential zone, which the ticket states. I believe the officer made an error." The judge interrupted. "The officer's word is law here. You will pay the fine, or we will proceed to a hearing." Danielle requested a hearing, wanting the dashcam footage to be reviewed, but the judge dismissed her request quickly. He seemed uninterested in listening. "This is a small-town court. We don't have time for lengthy disputes over minor traffic tickets." There was a tone in his voice that made it clear he saw her as a troublemaker rather than someone seeking justice. Danielle tried to remain calm, but inside she felt a familiar frustration. This was not about the ticket anymore. It was about being seen, or rather, not being seen for who she truly was. As the judge moved through the paperwork, he glanced at her briefly and said, "Do you practice law, Ms. Carter?" She nodded. "Yes, I do. I'm a federal prosecutor." The judge's face hardened, and he smirked slightly. "Well, good luck with that." His voice carried a subtle mockery, and a few people in the courtroom chuckled. Danielle's heart sank, but she kept her composure. She knew this was not just a mistake or a legal issue. It was something deeper. She had faced prejudice before, in her career, but it never felt good, especially not in a place that was supposed to be about fairness and justice. The judge quickly imposed the maximum fine allowed for the violation, and Danielle knew there was little point in arguing further. She accepted the ruling silently and left the courtroom with her head held high, despite the heavy feeling in her chest. Outside, she took a deep breath and looked around. The courthouse was an ordinary building, but what had just happened inside felt extraordinary to her. It was a reminder of the many invisible battles she fought every day, not just in courtrooms or offices, but in everyday moments. Danielle thought about the years of hard work it had taken to reach her position. She had graduated from law school, at the top of her class, earned her place as a respected federal prosecutor, and worked tirelessly on cases involving complex crimes and justice for victims. Yet here, in this small courtroom, her authority was dismissed with a careless joke. She wondered if the judge would have treated her differently if she looked different or came from a different background. The thought was painful but real. As she walked to her car, she noticed some of the courtroom staff whispering and exchanging glances. Some offered small nods or quick smiles of support, while others looked away, uncomfortable or unsure. Danielle knew she wasn't alone in this experience. Many people in her community faced similar disrespect or assumptions because of their race or appearance. It was a quiet kind of injustice that didn't make headlines but was felt deeply. She decided not to let this moment define her or her career. Instead, she would continue fighting for fairness and justice, using every tool at her disposal. This small courtroom experience was a reminder of why her work mattered so much. As she drove away, Danielle felt a mix of emotions: disappointment, yes, but also determination. She knew that true justice was not just about laws or fines, but about respect and understanding between people. And this was only the beginning. After the hearing in the small courthouse, Danielle Carter felt a quiet but strong sense of injustice. She had come to defend herself politely, but the judge's behavior was disappointing. He had not only dismissed her explanation, but had also made a sarcastic comment about her profession. That moment stayed with her as she left the courtroom. She knew the judge had no idea who she really was: a senior assistant United States attorney, a federal prosecutor who handled serious cases involving crimes that affected many lives. But at that moment, in that small town court, she was treated like just another person to be rushed through the system. Danielle wasn't the type to react with anger or loud protests. She believed in calm, clear communication and in using the right channels to seek justice. So after the hearing, she left quietly. But inside, she was thinking about what had happened and what to do next. The sarcastic tone of the judge and the quick decision to fine her without fully listening was more than just unfair. It was a sign of something deeper. It showed a lack of respect that many people, especially black women like Danielle, faced every day. She understood that this wasn't about the speeding ticket anymore. It was about respect, about being seen for who she was, and not just judged by appearances or assumptions. Danielle thought about how many times she had seen this kind of behavior in her work: people being treated differently because of their race or gender. She had fought against these injustices in court many times, but this time she had experienced it personally. When Danielle returned to her office at the federal courthouse, she tried to focus on her work. She dealt with complex criminal cases, making sure that the law was followed and that victims got justice. But the memory of the small courtroom and Judge Jennings' words stayed in her mind. She knew she couldn't ignore what had happened. Meanwhile, word began to spread quietly in the local legal community. In small towns like the one where the incident happened, news traveled fast, especially in courts where everyone knew everyone else. Some of the courthouse staff who had been there during Danielle's hearing started talking about what they had seen. Some were shocked by the judge's behavior. Others felt uncomfortable, but didn't say anything openly. What most people didn't know was Danielle's true identity and job title. To them, she had been just another defendant in a traffic case. But the staff who had seen her in her professional role at the federal courthouse recognized her immediately. They knew that she was one of the highest-ranking prosecutors in the area, someone who worked for the Department of Justice and had an important role in fighting crime at the federal level. One day, the county clerk received an official letter on the Department of Justice's letterhead. The letter questioned how the case had been handled in the local court and asked for a review of the judge's conduct during the hearing. It was clear that the letter was connected to Danielle's case. At first, the clerk thought it might be a mistake or an overreaction to a minor traffic ticket. But as he read the letter carefully, it became clear that this was serious. The letter pointed out that the judge had failed to give Danielle a fair hearing and had shown disrespect toward her as a federal prosecutor. When Judge Walter Jennings saw the letter, he was shocked. He had no idea that the woman he had fined and mocked was someone so important in the federal legal system. At first he thought it might be some kind of joke or prank, but the letter was official and came from the Department of Justice. His assistant district attorney and courthouse staff confirmed Danielle's identity. The realization made him uncomfortable. He remembered how he had cut her off, how he had mocked her when she said she practiced law. He recalled the chuckles from the courtroom when he made his sarcastic comment. It suddenly felt like a mistake, a serious one. Judge Jennings began to worry about the consequences. The letter from the Department of Justice was not just about the speeding ticket. It was about the judge's behavior and fairness in his courtroom. If word got out, it could affect his reputation and career. He started to make phone calls to understand the situation better. He reached out to the local police chief, the county clerk, and even to the assistant district attorney to gather more information about Danielle Carter and her role. The local police chief confirmed that Danielle was well known in the legal community and respected for her work. The county clerk told him that there had been complaints from other defendants before about how Judge Jennings ran his courtroom, but none had reached this level of seriousness. The assistant district attorney told him that Danielle was one of the toughest prosecutors they had ever worked with, someone who never backed down and always demanded justice. As the news spread among the courthouse staff, many started to feel uneasy around the judge. Some wondered if his attitude had affected other cases. They whispered quietly about how the judge might be forced to change his behavior or even face consequences. Danielle, meanwhile, continued her work quietly. She did not make any public statements about the incident. She did not want to cause drama or seek attention. For her, justice was about the work she did every day, helping victims and holding criminals accountable. But inside, she was satisfied to know that something was being done to address the unfair treatment she had received. Even though Danielle was calm and professional, the incident left a mark on her. She thought about how many people did not have the courage or the platform to speak up when treated unfairly. She remembered the many clients she had helped who faced similar disrespect or bias because of their skin color or background. This experience strengthened her resolve. It reminded her why her work as a federal prosecutor was so important. It reminded her why she had chosen this path: to fight for fairness, to stand up against injustice, and to be a voice for those who often went unheard. Meanwhile, the small town where the courthouse was located became a little more aware of the issues of fairness and respect in the justice system. The story, though not widely known outside the town, circulated quietly among lawyers, clerks, and local officials. Some started to question their own attitudes and the way the court system treated people differently. Judge Jennings knew that he had made a mistake, but change was never easy. The letter from the Department of Justice was only the beginning. He would have to face Danielle again, and this time, it would not be in a courtroom as a judge and defendant. It would be as two professionals who shared a commitment to justice, one who had been wronged and one who had to make things right. Danielle was ready. She knew that respect and fairness were not given. They had to be earned and demanded. And, sometimes, it took a difficult moment to bring those truths to light. This moment, simple as it seemed, a speeding ticket and a fine, had turned into something much bigger. It was about respect, identity, and the courage to stand tall even when faced with dismissal and sarcasm. And it was just the beginning of a story that would quietly change the lives of those involved, and perhaps the way justice was seen in that small-town courthouse. After the incident in the small courthouse, the story about Danielle Carter and Judge Walter Jennings began to spread quietly but steadily within the local legal community. Although Danielle had accepted the fine and moved on with her important work as a federal prosecutor, the letter sent to Judge Jennings from the Department of Justice created a ripple that slowly grew into a wave. The letter had arrived unexpectedly, catching the judge off guard and forcing him to face the reality of what had happened in his courtroom. Judge Jennings was a man used to respect and authority. For many years, he had been the final voice in countless cases, issuing decisions quickly and expecting his rulings to be accepted without question. But the letter from the Department of Justice challenged his authority in a way he had never imagined. It wasn't just about a speeding ticket anymore. It was about fairness, respect, and his behavior as a judge. At first, Judge Jennings tried to downplay the letter. He told himself that it was a simple misunderstanding or that Danielle, being a federal prosecutor, might be using her influence to cause trouble. But deep down, he felt uneasy. He remembered how he had dismissed Danielle's polite explanations during the hearing. He remembered his sarcastic words when she said she practiced law, and he remembered the chuckles from the courtroom when he made those comments. The judge began to think about how his actions might have appeared to others. Had he treated Danielle unfairly because of her race, or because she was a woman? Was he guilty of the kind of bias he had always told himself he didn't have? These questions weighed heavily on him, but pride and habit made it difficult for him to admit any fault openly. Word of the letter and the case spread quietly through the courthouse. The county clerk mentioned it to the assistant district attorney, who shared it with other prosecutors. Some staff members whispered among themselves about the judge's behavior, and a few expressed hope that this might lead to some changes. But there was also fear. After all, Judge Jennings was powerful, and many people depended on his decisions for their own jobs and security. Meanwhile, Danielle continued with her work as if nothing had changed. She believed in professionalism and didn't want to create unnecessary conflict. But she was aware that the situation had stirred something important. It was not just about one speeding ticket or one judge's behavior. It was about the justice system itself and how it treated people differently depending on their race, gender, or position. One afternoon, Danielle received a call from a courthouse staff member who wanted to thank her quietly for standing up. The staff member said that several people had talked about the incident and that many were impressed by how she had handled herself. Danielle appreciated the support but told the person that real change would require more than just conversations. In the days that followed, Judge Jennings found himself increasingly isolated. His courtroom felt less welcoming, and some of his usual allies were more distant. His assistant district attorney advised him to handle the situation carefully and suggested that he meet with Danielle to try to resolve the matter privately. The judge was reluctant but agreed. Before the meeting could take place, however, the Department of Justice sent a representative to the county to review the local court's procedures and the judge's conduct. The representative spoke with courthouse staff, reviewed past cases, and examined how defendants were treated in similar situations. The review revealed a pattern of rushed decisions, lack of proper hearings, and, in some cases, disrespectful treatment of defendants, especially those from minority communities. The findings were not publicized widely, but they made their way to local officials and legal authorities. The pressure on Judge Jennings grew. He was forced to reflect on his actions and their consequences. He realized that the justice system he believed in was flawed, at least in his courtroom. The realization was painful, but necessary. Meanwhile, Danielle prepared herself for the upcoming meeting with the judge. She understood that this was an opportunity to address not only her case but also the broader issues of fairness and respect in the justice system. She knew the judge might be defensive or uncomfortable, but she was determined to speak honestly and calmly. When the day of the meeting arrived, it took place in a neutral government office rather than the courthouse. Judge Jennings arrived with a visible discomfort, while Danielle remained composed and professional. The atmosphere was tense but respectful. The judge began the meeting with a hesitant apology, acknowledging that his behavior during the hearing had been inappropriate, and that he had failed to treat Danielle with the respect she deserved. Danielle listened carefully but did not interrupt. She knew that change would take time and required more than words. When it was her turn to speak, Danielle shared her experiences as a black woman in the legal profession. She explained how often she had been underestimated or dismissed because of her race and gender. She talked about the importance of respect and fairness in every interaction, not just in formal court cases. Her words were powerful but calm. She did not accuse or blame. Instead, she invited the judge to see the justice system through her eyes, to understand how small moments of disrespect could add up to a larger problem of inequality. Judge Jennings listened intently. For the first time in a long time, he did not interrupt or dismiss what he was hearing. The meeting lasted longer than expected, and by the end, there was a sense that something meaningful had taken place. After the meeting, Judge Jennings began to make subtle changes in his courtroom. He started asking more questions before making decisions. He gave defendants more time to explain their cases. He treated everyone with greater patience and respect. The courthouse staff noticed the difference. Some were surprised, others hopeful. Danielle did not return to that courtroom again, but her quiet courage had sparked a change. The story of the meeting and the changes that followed remained mostly unknown outside the local legal community. It was not a headline news story or a viral moment on social media. Instead, it was a quiet shift. One courtroom at a time, one judge at a time. For Danielle, the experience reinforced her belief in the power of dignity and respect. She continued her work as a federal prosecutor with renewed determination, knowing that even small moments could make a difference. For Judge Jennings, it was a lesson in humility and growth. He learned that justice was not just about laws and rules, but about the people those laws served. And for the town, it was a reminder that true justice required more than authority. It required understanding, fairness, and respect for all. After the important meeting between Danielle Carter and Judge Walter Jennings, things began to change. But change is never easy or immediate. Danielle had spoken honestly and calmly about her experience and the larger issues she faced as a Black woman in the legal system. Judge Jennings had listened and agreed to try to be fairer and more respectful. But words alone were not enough. Actions had to follow, and habits had to be broken. The first few weeks after the meeting were challenging. For both of them, Judge Jennings found himself under a microscope. His courtroom was quieter than usual, and the courthouse staff watched him carefully. He tried to apply what he had learned, but old habits and frustrations sometimes got in the way. It was hard to admit that he had been wrong, and even harder to change years of behavior. Danielle, on the other hand, focused on her work. She had many cases waiting for her attention. Her job as a federal prosecutor was demanding and often stressful. She dealt with serious crimes, complex investigations, and difficult victims. But even amid the busyness, the memory of the small courtroom and the judge's sarcastic comment remained with her. One day, Danielle received an invitation from the local legal association. They wanted her to speak at a community event about justice and fairness in the legal system. At first, she was hesitant. The incident with Judge Jennings had been personal and painful, and she was not sure if she wanted to share it publicly. But after thinking it over, she realized that her story could help others. It could shine a light on problems that many people faced, but few talked about openly. When the day of the event arrived, Danielle stood in front of a room filled with lawyers, judges, students, and members of the public. She spoke about her experience in the small-town courtroom and how respect and fairness were sometimes missing in the justice system. She talked about the importance of treating every person with dignity, regardless of their race, gender, or background. Her speech was powerful and honest. She did not focus on blame but on hope. Hope that the legal system could improve, that people could learn from their mistakes, and that justice could be more than just rules on paper. The audience listened quietly, some nodding in agreement, others taking notes. After the event, many people approached Danielle to thank her for speaking out. Some shared their own stories of unfair treatment or bias. Others asked how they could help make the legal system better. Danielle felt a deep sense of connection and responsibility. She realized that her role as a prosecutor was not just about winning cases, but also about being a leader for change. Meanwhile, back at the courthouse, Judge Jennings was making slow but steady progress. He started attending workshops on diversity, equity, and inclusion. He read books and articles about bias and discrimination. He talked with colleagues and community leaders about how to improve the courtroom experience for everyone. These efforts were not always easy. Some people in the courthouse resisted change. They believed that the judge's way was the only way, and that fairness did not require special attention to race or gender. But Judge Jennings was determined to do better. He knew that change was uncomfortable, but it was necessary. One day, a young African-American woman came to the courthouse with a legal issue. She was nervous and unsure about what to expect. Judge Jennings noticed her discomfort and made an extra effort to explain the process clearly and kindly. He listened carefully to her story and treated her with respect. The woman later told Danielle about the positive experience, saying she felt valued and heard for the first time. Stories like this encouraged Danielle. She knew that small changes could make a big difference in people's lives. She continued to work closely with local legal groups, offering training and support on issues of fairness and bias. At the same time, Danielle was handling a difficult federal case involving corruption in a nearby city. The case was complex and high-profile, drawing attention from the media and politicians. It required long hours, careful investigation, and strong legal arguments. Danielle was at the center of it all, leading the prosecution team with skill and determination. The pressure was intense, but Danielle used her experience and strength to keep going. She knew that this case was important not just for the victims, but for the message it sent about justice and accountability. Throughout this time, Danielle never forgot the lesson from her own courtroom experience. She knew that respect and fairness were the foundation of justice, and she worked to ensure those values were upheld in every case she handled. Judge Jennings, too, continued to grow. He was no longer the judge who dismissed a defendant's explanation or made sarcastic remarks. He became someone who listened more, judged less quickly, and treated every person with dignity. His courtroom atmosphere improved, and more people felt comfortable and respected there. The changes were not perfect or complete. Bias and unfairness did not disappear overnight, but the steps taken by Danielle and Judge Jennings showed that, even in a small town, change was possible. One afternoon, Danielle received a call from the local courthouse. They wanted to invite her back, not as a defendant but as a guest speaker for a new training program for judges and court staff on fairness and respect. Danielle accepted the invitation with pride and hope. She knew that sharing her story and experience could inspire others to do better. As she prepared for the training, Danielle reflected on her journey. From a simple speeding ticket to speaking in courtrooms and community halls, her story had become a symbol of resilience, dignity, and the ongoing fight for justice. And she was ready to keep fighting, knowing that every voice mattered, every story counted, and every step toward fairness was a step toward a better future. After the invitation from the local courthouse, Danielle Carter felt a deep sense of responsibility and hope. She knew this was more than just an opportunity to speak. It was a chance to create real change. She was no longer just a federal prosecutor, handling tough cases. She was becoming a leader in the movement for fairness and respect in the legal system. This invitation showed that her quiet courage and professionalism had made a difference. Preparing for the training sessions was a big task. Danielle wanted to make sure her message was clear, honest, and inspiring. She thought about how to share her own story without anger or bitterness, but with the strength and determination that had carried her through difficult times. She knew that many judges and court staff had never faced these issues directly. Some might feel defensive. Others might be unaware of their own biases. Danielle wanted to reach all of them. When the day of the first training session arrived, Danielle stood in front of a room full of judges, clerks, lawyers, and court employees. Some faces were curious, some skeptical, and others welcoming. Danielle took a deep breath and began to speak, starting with her personal experience. The speeding ticket, the courtroom incident, and the moment she realized that fairness and justice was more than just a legal concept. It was a human right. She talked about the pain and frustration she felt when the judge dismissed her respectfully, not knowing who she was. She explained how such moments are common for many people who are judged by the color of their skin or their background, rather than by their character or truth. Danielle emphasized that this was not just about her story, but about thousands of others who face similar challenges every day. As she spoke, she saw the expressions in the room change. Some judges nodded in understanding. Some court staff whispered to each other, realizing they had never thought about these things before. Danielle's words reached their hearts because she spoke not as an angry critic, but as a professional who wanted the system to be better. She introduced ideas about unconscious bias, how people sometimes make judgments without even realizing it. She shared examples and studies that showed how bias could affect decisions in courtrooms, even when judges and staff tried to be fair. Danielle also spoke about the importance of empathy and listening, encouraging the audience to treat every person who came into the courtroom with dignity and respect. The training was not easy for everyone. Some people struggled to accept that their own behavior might need to change. Others were defensive, worried that they might be accused or criticized unfairly. But Danielle was patient and understanding. She welcomed questions and honest conversations, creating a space where people felt safe to learn and grow. The sessions lasted for weeks, covering many topics related to fairness, respect, and the role of the justice system in society. Danielle used stories, role-playing exercises, and group discussions to engage her audience. She encouraged judges and court staff to reflect on their own attitudes and to commit to making small but meaningful changes in their work. Meanwhile, Danielle continued her demanding work as a federal prosecutor. The training sessions energized her, reminding her why she had chosen this path. Her reputation grew not only as a skilled lawyer, but also as a passionate advocate for justice reform. Her colleagues respected her courage and dedication. Back in the local courthouse, changes began to appear. Judges who attended Danielle's training sessions started to adopt new approaches. They listened more carefully, gave defendants more time to explain, and tried to check their own biases. Court staff became more aware of their own language and behavior, working to create a more welcoming environment. The community noticed these changes too. People who had once feared or distrusted the court system began to feel more comfortable participating. Local legal organizations and community leaders supported the efforts, helping to spread the message of fairness and respect beyond the courthouse walls. Danielle's story even reached nearby towns and cities. She was invited to speak at conferences, law schools, and community groups. Her message was clear. Justice must be fair, not just in laws, but in actions and attitudes. She reminded everyone that the legal system belongs to the people, and it must serve all people equally. Despite these successes, Danielle knew the work was far from over. Bias and unfairness were deeply rooted problems, and change would take time. She also faced criticism from some who felt that her focus on fairness and bias was unnecessary or too political. But Danielle stood firm. She believed that real justice required honesty, courage, and a commitment to continuous improvement. One day, Danielle received a letter from Judge Walter Jennings. In it, he expressed gratitude for the training sessions and acknowledged the positive impact they had on him, personally and professionally. He wrote that he was committed to being a better judge, one who listens, respects, and values every person in his courtroom. The letter was a powerful moment for Danielle. It showed that even those who had once resisted change could learn and grow. It reminded her that her journey, from being fined and dismissed in a small courtroom to becoming a leader for fairness, was proof that change was possible. Danielle continued to build on her work. She collaborated with other prosecutors, defense lawyers, judges, and community groups to develop programs and policies promoting equity and justice. She also mentored young lawyers and law students, encouraging them to be courageous and compassionate advocates. Her story inspired many, not because it was dramatic or sensational, but because it was real and relatable. It showed how one person's experience could spark a movement toward justice and respect for all. Looking back, Danielle saw how that small moment, the speeding ticket and the judge's sarcastic comment, had changed everything. It had challenged her, hurt her, and motivated her. It had opened a door to conversations and actions that were making a difference. Her journey was a reminder that justice is not a destination, but a process. It requires constant attention, humility, and the willingness to listen and learn. Most importantly, it requires respect for every human being. And so, Danielle Carter's story continues, a story of courage, change, and the ongoing fight to make justice truly just for everyone.